Imagine standing on a bridge, looking completely calm to anyone passing by. But on the inside, your mind is screaming, completely detached from reality. You're smiling, you're nodding, but your thoughts, they aren't even yours anymore. And you're even saying, I'm fine. They're loud, they're chaotic, and terrifying. You look down at your hands and they feel like they belong to someone else. And yet, to the outside world, you just look like a tired mom. Nothing more. When I first started to analyze this case, it really hit me hard because today we're using a clinical lens to look at the Lindsay Clancy case and the terrifying reality of polypharmacy. It's all the medications that she'd been taking to treat her. So many people look at this tragedy and they see an unforgivable, calculated act. They see a headline and they immediately write it off. She's guilty. She's pretending. She did this on purpose. But I'm looking at a completely different possibility here. It's an alternative thought of this. You might disagree with me. That's okay. But hold off until you watch this video. This clinical breakdown, I'm going to look at her mind and how it was chemically overwhelmed, systematically, day by day, until it completely shattered. What if the medical system designed to save her actually triggered her worst nightmare? Let's just pause and think about that for a second, because it's incredibly heavy. I know that's a lot to take in right from the start. So let's slow it down. Let's take a breath. And let's look at why this actually matters, because it does. It matters to us. There is a massive, terrifying systemic blind spot that's happening here that almost everyone is missing. Not everyone, but a lot of people are. Standard true crime is great at telling you what happened, who did what, and when. But frankly, that doesn't really help us prevent the next tragedy from happening. Today, we're dissecting the clinical why, because understanding this is really the only way we can actually help protect our own families. As a licensed professional counselor, when I look at the medical timeline of Lindsay Clancy, I don't see a cold, unfeeling person. I really don't. In fact, when I first read through the clinical files and saw the sheer volume of her prescriptions, I actually had to stop because it didn't make any clinical sense whatsoever. I felt this immediate sense of dread as a clinician. What I see is a devastating textbook example of iatrogenic psychological trauma, which is essentially a psychiatric crisis or severe mental health injury induced directly by medical treatment. Today, we're going to peel back the clinical records of Lindsay and see exactly where her reality started to break and how her brain chemistry was pushed past the point of an unfortunate no return. But there's one psychological bias happening here that really no one's talking about. It's something called clinical incongruence, where what we see on the outside completely masks a severe clinical disassociation happening on the inside. I'll explain exactly how that works in just a few minutes, because understanding it might literally save someone you love. By the end of this video, you'll know the psychological and medical warning signs that signal severe drug interactions, skills that you can use to spot danger and protect mental wellness in your own life. Because this isn't just about Lindsay and her case. This is about anyone who has ever walked into a doctor's office feeling anxious, overwhelmed, or desperate, and then walked out with a handful of prescriptions. It's about how we talk to our doctors, how we advocate for our loved ones, and how we recognize when a treatment is doing more harm than good. That's why I'm doing this. I'm John Cordray. I'm an LPC. That's a licensed professional counselor, and I've been doing this since 2007. Everything that I say in this video is my speculation based on public records and behaviors that I observe. And no, it's not a diagnosis of anyone involved in this case. I also want to add that I'm not a psychiatrist and I'm not a pharmacist, but I've seen how over-medication can cause serious problems. And I'm also not anti-medications and I'm not anti-doctors. There are legitimate times when taking medications and there are really good doctors out there. But my point of this video is to look into what was happening with Lindsay and then apply it with our own lives. Today's video is actually a direct part 2 follow-up to my full clinical breakdown of this tragic case. If you haven't seen it yet, go back and look at it and watch it and let me know what you think. In my first video on Lindsay Clancy's case, I looked closely at the postpartum mental health crisis. But when I went through the comments on that video, so many of you pointed to one very specific, terrifying detail that you wanted me to dive a little deeper into. It was her psychiatric cocktail. A lot of you asked how it was so clinically possible for one person to be on so many medications at one time and what that actually does to a human brain. We're going to look at that. So, in response to your comments in the massive discussion that we've started there, today we're focusing entirely on the clinical reality of polypharmacy, how her mind was chemically overwhelmed with medications, systematically, every day, until it completely shattered. Hey friends, if you want more deep dive mental health breakdowns like this one, go ahead and karate chop that subscribe button. All right, so let's dive into Lindsay Clancy's clinical file here and her over-medications that I believe contributed to her break. Let's look at the facts. Actually, let's look at the human behind the facts first. In late 2022, Lindsay Clancy is a pediatric nurse. Think about that for a second. She's someone who literally cared for sick children for a living. Some of you do that as well, and some of you are healthcare providers. She was trained to spot medical emergencies in others. But at the same time, privately, behind those closed doors, she was battling severe postpartum anxiety. And let's be honest, that alone is incredibly isolating. You're supposed to be in this blissful phase of motherhood, but instead your mind is constantly screaming with worst case scenarios. Got to be difficult. So what does she do? She reaches out for help like most of us would do. She does everything right. She goes to the doctors. She admits that she's struggling. She doesn't even try to hide it. But then the medical system takes over. And this is where the timeline starts to get really, really dizzying and frustrating and honestly pretty frightening. So Lindsay goes to the doctor, tells what's going on, and she's put on one medication. It's a typical antidepressant. But maybe she feels a little bit jittery, or maybe she can't sleep. So she's giving something else to take it the edge off. And then another medication is added to offset that side effect. And then benzos for the sudden panic. Then another. Do you see the dominoes falling here? By the end of this rapid fire prescribing cycle, she's reportedly prescribed over 13 different psychiatric medications in a span of just a few months. 13. Let that number sink in. When I first read about that, I had to stop. I was so angry. It didn't make at all any clinical sense. I mean, 13? As a counselor who has worked with clients on psychiatric regimens for nearly 2 decades, my jaw dropped. It made me incredibly anxious just by reading it, and then just deeply sad. How is a human brain supposed to process 13 different chemical shifts in such a short window? That's a lot to take in. I know that's a lot to process. Some of you have gone through that yourselves. Again, I am not pointing the fingers at doctors here. We need our doctors. We need psychiatrists. We need medication. But sometimes it's over-medication. And sometimes what was meant to help becomes the exact thing that breaks you. So let's just take a breath together and look at why this actually matters for you and your family and me and my family. Because this isn't just an isolated tragedy. This is a window into a massive systemic issue. We've got to talk about it. We have to spotlight it. It's behind closed doors. People know about it. They've experienced it, but we don't really talk about it. We need to do that right now. Pull up graphic 6. This is a classic, terrifying example of polypharmacy, which is simply the congruent use of multiple drugs to treat a single condition or co-occurring conditions. You're on one medication and that medication produces side effects, and so you're put on another medication to counter that side effect, and the list goes on. And for Lindsay, it was 13. Polypharmacy often begins with a single prescription. You go in for one issue, go to the doctor, you get that prescription, you take the medication, and it does some crazy things to you. And when the side effects are treated with additional drugs rather than addressing the root causes, which is my point here, the regimen rapidly spirals out of control. Now, sometimes under strict clinical supervision, a couple of medications are necessary. Again, I'm not anti-medication here. I'm not saying that all medication is bad. Not at all. Quite the contrary. But when you mix different classes of drugs like benzos and SSRIs and antipsychotics in a rapid succession, they don't just sit there quietly in your system. They don't wait their turn. Bring up graphic 8. Instead, they create what we call a synergistic drug interaction. This is where the drugs don't just add up, they multiply. They compound each other's side effects. It's like throwing gasoline on a fire that's already burning out of control. Her brain chemistry wasn't just being gently balanced or treated. It was being utterly flooded. And here's a developmental blueprint we need to map out. When a brain is flooded like this, it can trigger a severe chemical cascade. We're not just talking about a feeling groggy or having a dry mouth. We're talking about the profound neurological shifts that happen. When you introduce that many synthetics, you run into a massive risk of inducing iatrogenic psychological trauma and severe cognitive impairment. Her brain was essentially being hijacked by the very tools meant to restore her. But here's where it gets even more complicated. And this is the bridge that we have to cross to understand the tragedy. A person experiencing this level of chemical overload doesn't always look like they're in a crisis. Sometimes they mask. They try to keep up appearances because they are terrified of what is happening to them. They experience a depersonalization where they feel like an observer, watching their own life unfold like a movie. As we move forward, we need to understand exactly what happens when this chemical overload completely takes over and how a mind fractures under that weight. Because once that threshold is crossed, normal reality fades away. As we look closely at the weeks leading up to this devastating tragedy, there's a pattern that emerges here. It's a pattern that, frankly, it terrifies me as a clinician. We see Lindsay engaging in what we call clinical masking. Now, what does that actually mean in everyday life? Let me tell you. To everyone else around her, she looked functional. The illusion of calm masked her internal chaos. She was taking her kids to their doctor's appointments. She was texting her friends back. She was making dinner. She looked, okay, tired, yeah, but underneath that surface, she was drowning. This is what we call high-functioning anxiety, or clinical masking, taken to an absolute dangerous extreme. When you're a mother, and especially when you're a nurse, you're trained to prioritize everyone else's needs above your own. You put on a face. You do what needs to be done because you feel like you have no other choice. But the lived reality of your internal world, it's screaming, it's detached, and in a severe state of disassociation. This takes incongruence to a whole new terrifying level. But the sheer mental and physical energy it takes to maintain that mask while your brain chemistry is being completely rewritten by 13 different psychiatric medications, it's unsustainable. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. Eventually, your arms get tired, and that ball is going to shoot up to the surface with incredible, uncontrollable force. And that's exactly what happened here. Underneath that calm, functional exterior, Lindsay was slipping into a severe state of medication-induced psychosis. Pull up graphic 14. I want to be very, very clear about something here, because this is where the public narrative usually gets it completely wrong. Psychosis isn't always a slow, gradual slide where you have plenty of time to step in and help. It can be sudden, violent. It can break. One day you're struggling, and the next your brain can no longer distinguish what's real and what's a delusion. The line between reality and hallucination just completely vanishes. When you're in a state of acute psychosis, your brain is severely misinterpreting sensory input. You aren't processing information the way a healthy brain does. Lindsay wasn't acting out of malice or anger. Her mind had quite literally fractured under a massive chemical overload. It was a biochemical takeover. I know this is incredibly hard to listen to. It is even harder to try to comprehend. Just thinking about what must have been going on in her mind, it's heavy. If we need to take a break again, take a break. Because we have to talk about the scary part of this. We have to keep going. We have to look at why people around her and even her medical team missed it. And this is where it gets incredibly scary as a therapist. Her doctors didn't see the warning signs of clinical disassociation. When you're disassociating, you feel completely disconnected from your body, from your thoughts, and all of your surroundings. It's a defense mechanism. It's a way for the brain to protect itself when the emotional or chemical trauma becomes too much to bear. But to an outside observer, even a trained doctor in a brief 15-minute medication check, disassociation can look like calmness. It can look like compliance. You go into the doctor's office and your doctor will ask, "How are you feeling?" And then you say, "I'm okay," because your brain has shut down its emotional centers. They saw a patient who was quiet and cooperative. They didn't see that she was experiencing severe depersonalization and derealization. They didn't see that her sense of self was completely gone. And that is the tragic gap between clinical observation and lived reality. The system looked at a checklist, but they missed the human. But we can't just leave it there. We can't just look at this tragedy and feel hopeless. We have to learn from it. Next, we're going to look at the exact questions you must ask your doctor to ensure this never, ever happens to you or to a loved one. We're going to talk about how to spot these quiet, disassociative warning signs in the people you care about, and how to actively advocate for yourself when you feel like your treatment is taking you down a dark path. If trained medical professionals in a clinic miss these signs, it raises a terrifying question. How are we, as spouses, as parents, or friends, supposed to see through the mask? When someone you love is experiencing severe clinical disassociation or a chemical overload, they aren't always going to have a dramatic, obvious breakdown. Often, the signs are incredibly quiet. They're small. They're subtle shifts in behavior that we can easily write off as just being tired. Here are the 3 specific non-obvious warning signs that I want you to be aware of: hypercompliance, the cognitive lag, and the static mask. First, let's look at hypercompliance. When a brain is chemically overwhelmed, it completely loses the bandwidth to make decisions or process preferences. If you ask your loved one what they want for dinner or what movie they want to watch, and the answer is always a flat, immediate, I don't know, whatever you want, pay attention. This isn't just being polite. It can be a sign of cognitive exhaustion. They're agreeing to everything because arguing, choosing, or asserting a preference takes a level of mental energy they simply don't possess. They're coasting on autopilot. Second, watch for the cognitive lag. Pay close attention to how long it takes them to respond to a single question. I'm not talking about a thoughtful pause. I'm talking about a distinct 3 to 4 second delay before they register that you've even spoken to them. It's like their brain has to fight through a thick layer of chemical fog just to process basic sensory input and form a sentence. If you start noticing this delay in everyday conversations, their brain chemistry may be struggling to keep up. And third, look for the static mask. When someone is masking, they will smile, they will nod, and they will probably even say, "I'm fine." But look closely at their eyes and their timing of their expressions. A natural human face reacts dynamically to a conversation. We look sad when we hear something heavy. We smile when someone laughs. But a person who is disassociating will often hold a static expression. The smile stays on their face just a fraction of a second too long, or their eyes remain completely flat and distant, even while their mouth is smiling. It's a physical mask, and if you look closely, you can see where it doesn't quite match the moment. We have to start looking past the surface, because when a loved one is drowning, they won't always splash and scream for help. Sometimes they just quietly slip under. And that brings us to the most important critical part of our discussion today. If you start noticing these quiet shifts in someone you love, or even in yourself, what do you actually do about it? So let's talk about how to take control of the situation before it's too late. All right, let's bring this all home. This is the part of our discussion that's quite frankly the most critical, in my opinion. It's not just about analyzing a tragedy from a distance. It's about what we do with this information right now in our own lives. How do we protect ourselves, our spouses, our kids, and the people we love? If you or a loved one are taking multiple prescriptions, please, you have to be incredibly cautious. I can't stress this enough. We live in a society that often looks for the quick fix, the magic pill that will make the pain, the overwhelming anxiety, or the deep sadness just disappear. And sometimes we need that. But we have to distinguish between the need and the reality. But brain chemistry is not a simple light switch. It's a highly delicate, deeply interconnected ecosystem. When we introduce powerful chemicals, we're changing the entire landscape of our minds. And we have to treat that process with the utmost respect and caution. And this is where you have to step up and actively advocate for yourself. I know that this can be incredibly intimidating. When you're sitting there in a doctor's office, you're looking at someone with a medical degree on their wall. It's easy to feel small. It's easy to default to their expertise. And yes, they are experts, but they can make mistakes. It's easy to just nod and say, okay, doctor, whatever you think is best. But you have to remember, you are your ultimate expert on your own body and your own mind. You live in your skin every single day, not your doctor. They only see you for a brief 15 minutes at best. You need to practice active self-advocacy. You need to advocate for yourself constantly. And how do we actually do that? Bring up graphic 26. You are the ultimate expert of your own mind and body, right? Not your doctor. Your doctor is an expert, but you're the ultimate expert of your mind and body. You have to replace passive medical compliance with structured self-advocacy to protect yourself and your family. And the first step is documenting the data. And then ask the hard questions and make your doctor explain the medications, and then get a second opinion if you need to. I want to go a bit deeper here because it's so critical for you. First, keep a daily symptom journal. I tell my clients this all the time. Don't rely on your memory. If it's like mine, you're not going to remember much, especially when you're already feeling overwhelmed. When you start a new medication, write down exactly how you feel. Are you sleeping less? Are you feeling a sudden spike in physical anxiety? Are you starting to feel detached, like you're watching yourself from across the room? Write it down and make sure you put the date down and the time. This is where your data is incredibly valuable clinical evidence. Second, you have to ask the hard questions to your doctor. When a healthcare provider suggests adding a new prescription, don't just accept their prescription slip. Ask them why each specific medication is being added. What's the target symptom here? How is this new drug going to interact with the ones that you are already taking? What's the exit plan? Yes, you need an exit plan on these medications. Medications shouldn't always be a lifetime sentence. Sometimes they're just a temporary clinical bridge. You need to know that. And third, never, ever hesitate to get a second opinion. If a doctor gets defensive because you want another professional to look at your treatment plan, that's a massive red flag. A good doctor will welcome another set of eyes because they care about your well-being, not their professional ego. If you feel like your concerns are being dismissed, or if you feel like you're being overmedicated, trust your gut. Find another provider who will actually listen to you. This entire case raises a much bigger, much more uncomfortable question about our society and our healthcare system. We have to look at the macro level. We have to do better. For Lindsay, for her family, and for everyone who is currently struggling in the silence behind a mask of functionality. Think about this. We live in a fast-paced world where doctors are pressured by insurance companies to see as many patients as possible in a single day. That leads to a checkbox mentality. Got anxiety? Check. Here's an SSRI. Can't sleep because of the SSRI? Check. Here's a sleep aid. Jittery from the sleep aid? Check. Here's a beta blocker. It's a vicious cycle of treating side effects rather than addressing the root clinical issues. In my opinion, as a therapist, we need to move toward a more biopsychosocial model of mental health. One that looks at the biological, the psychological, and the social factors of a person's life first, rather than reaching for a prescription pad after a 15-minute conversation. Wow, what a tragic case this is with Lindsay Clancy. And what a tragic it is for so many people in the world today. The overmedication problem. You feel bad, you go to the people that are supposed to help you. They want to help you, but they're pressured. And so they feel the pressure, the time crunch, and so they just check off the boxes. So sad and tragic. And if you were experiencing that, I'm so sorry that you're experiencing that. Go get a second opinion. Look at these action steps that I have for you. Follow them. And maybe there's a different plan for you. Wow. This was heavy, wasn't it? And if you want to understand the foundational issues here, how her postpartum mental health was completely misunderstood and neglected, make sure to check out my first clinical breakdown on Lindsay. Do you think our medical system relies too heavily on a pill for every symptom approach instead of a holistic mental health support? That's something to think about.